This week on The Inside Story, America's 47th president, Donald Trump, takes the oath of office in Washington. See the executive actions Mr. Trump signed in his first few days back in the White House. Now, on The Inside Story, the new Trump administration.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of The Inside Story. I'm Carla Babb. For the second time, Donald Trump is President of the United States. A 21-gun salute announced the new president to supporters who withstood the cold to gather on the National Mall. Hundreds attended the ceremony to welcome the new president inside the Capitol Rotunda, where the inauguration was moved due to the extreme weather. Before the inauguration, President Joe Biden met Trump as he returned to the White House with the words, "Welcome home." The two traveled together from the White House to the inauguration ceremony at the Capitol, and after taking the oath of office, President Trump laid out his vision for the next 4 years.
The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first. My proudest legacy will be that of a peacemaker and unifier. That's what I want to be, a peacemaker and a unifier. Many people thought it was impossible for me to stage such a historic political comeback. But as you see today, here I am. The American people have spoken. Thank you. Thank you. In recent years, our nation has suffered greatly, but we are going to bring it back and make it great again, greater than ever before.
After his inauguration, President Trump wasted no time going to work. Just hours after the ceremony, the president signed a series of executive actions designed to advance his America First agenda. VOA's Anita Powell has more.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will.
On this historic first day of his second term in office, President Donald Trump laid out his vision for a bolder and larger United States.
The United States will once again consider itself a growing nation, one that increases our wealth, expands our territory, builds our cities, raises our expectations, and carries our flag into new and beautiful horizons. And we will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars.
Then he got to work, signing a stack of executive orders. He said they include a declaration of a national emergency at the southern border that would allow the deployment of troops and a national energy emergency that will allow more domestic extraction. He also declared that there are only two genders and said he would order that the Gulf of Mexico be renamed the Gulf of America. Historians say that Trump made history by using what is historically a unifying speech to portray a future that many Americans may disagree with.
It was less an inaugural speech and more a State of the Union. He just listed a series of bullet points of projects he wanted to undertake, from deporting immigrants to seizing back the Panama Canal.
Thousands of Trump supporters came to Washington from across the country because they say his policies speak to them.
Common sense, the bringing back of common sense out loud. So many people have, in my position, feel like we are the silent majority, and I think this is going to give us the opportunity to speak out loud and to be, and unafraid to speak the truth and to speak common sense.
Shortly after his inaugural, Trump spoke to a smaller group of supporters in the Capitol and reiterated claims that the 2020 election was totally rigged, a claim without proof. He also alluded to his plans to pardon some of those convicted over the violent events of January 6, 2021, when a mob of Trump supporters attempted to disrupt the certification of the election won by Joe Biden.
And I think this was a better speech than the one I made upstairs, okay? I think this was better, JD. I think this was much better.
Some of Trump's powerful supporters expressed their joy.
This is what victory feels like. Yeah!
CEO Elon Musk was among the billionaires in the Capitol Rotunda for the ceremony. Consumer advocacy groups are sounding alarms about some of the new president's quieter moves that seek to loosen regulations and, they say, benefit these elite few.
When we think about why the incoming Trump administration wants to freeze regulations and halt public protections wholesale, it is at the behest of the wealthiest among us, corporate special interests. They are who benefits when we don't have guardrails on the books.
Historians and analysts say it's not clear how many of Trump's day one actions, which his officials say number more than 100, will fly when challenged legally. For that answer, they say, look to tomorrow. Anita Powell, VOA News, the White House.
I'm joined by VOA China editor Elizabeth Lee and VOA congressional correspondent Catherine Gibson to discuss what's happened so far in the first busy days of the second Trump presidency. Let's put up President Trump's cabinet picks on the screen. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was the first cabinet member to be confirmed on Inauguration Day. Catherine, what led to such a quick confirmation?
Yeah, right. I mean, there were a couple of different factors that went into that. Part of it is that Rubio is well respected on both sides of the aisle. He was a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for a decade, well known there, well respected for his ability to work on issues in Latin America. There wasn't a lot of opposition to his nomination. Second, Secretary of State is a very important cabinet position, and we know that President Trump is going to hit a lot of foreign policy challenges right out of the gate in his second term. Ukraine, the Gaza ceasefire, tariffs, all of those issues. It really helps to have a Secretary of State in place so that he can be in there and really start filling some of those lower positions that are so important in implementing administration policy. So just one of those things that you have to get going right off the bat.
Not to mention the pacing threat for the military, which is China. Rubio is considered very hawkish on China, Elizabeth. How is he hoping to shape the policy to counter China?
Yeah, to understand what he's going to do, we need to understand how he defines China. And during his confirmation hearings, he defined China as, I quote, the most potent and dangerous adversary the U.S. has ever faced. And he said the U.S. and China have been competing in different realms, and that includes technology, science, geopolitics, just to name a few. And so he says, really, the U.S. needs to look at its domestic policy by rebuilding domestic industry and not rely on any one given country when it comes to our critical minerals. And so these are all important factors. And he says if these things don't happen, then in less than 10 years, how Americans live and what's important to us could all be controlled by China. And he used some examples, including whether it's the movies that we watched or the medicines that we need could be controlled by China and what they decide.
And before we leave those cabinet picks, I cover the Pentagon, so I would be remiss if I did not note that Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, did not sail through with strong bipartisan support, the bipartisan support that you normally see for a Secretary of Defense pick. Catherine, you and I watched that hearing together. Right. Strong opposing opinions on both sides. Tell me more.
That's right. So obviously Hegseth is one of the more controversial picks from Trump this time around. That really concerns some Senate Democrats who are worried that he doesn't have the experience to run a massive department like the Department of Defense. As you well know, that's billions of dollars, thousands of personnel, a very complicated job for somebody who, quite frankly, didn't have a lot of experience in terms of running things going into this. So there was a lot of back and forth.
Absolutely, yes. So let's talk about Trump's pardons for the January 6th protesters. It came as no surprise that he pardoned the protesters. But what was so surprising was that he pardoned all of the protesters, including some of those convicted for assaulting police officers. And J.D. Vance, his vice president, had just said hours before the inauguration that obviously, I think that was the word he used. He said, obviously, if you were violent against police officers, you would not be pardoned. So explain this, what's happening on Capitol Hill? How are people responding?
Right. Well, obviously, this is something that hits hard up on Capitol Hill for many lawmakers who were there on January 6, 2021. You heard immediate reaction from Democratic leadership, Hakeem Jeffries, former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who were in danger on that day, strongly condemning the actions of Trump. And you actually heard from some Senate Republicans as well who are concerned about the precedent that this sets. So not a great way to start out with Capitol Hill.
Well, here are some of Trump's other executive orders. He removed the U.S. from the World Health Organization. He suspends U.S. foreign assistance programs for 90 days, pending a review of whether they align with the America First agenda. Now, take a look at this. This is the tallest mountain in North America. President Barack Obama 10 years ago changed the name from Mount McKinley, after U.S. President William McKinley, to Denali, which was what Native Alaskans had called it for hundreds of years. But now it's Denali no longer. Trump has renamed it Mount McKinley again. And I must say, I have seen that mountain in person, and it is majestic and incredible. Whatever it is named will not change that. One more name change of note, I should say. President Trump signed an executive order renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. And speaking of Mexico, Trump has said he wants to hit Mexico hard with tariffs, also Canada. Explain this.
Well, I think one of the striking things was that if you listen to Trump's inaugural speech in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda, a lot of big applause lines from the Republican lawmakers who were in there listening to him. The tariffs line did not get as big of an applause line because Republican lawmakers are concerned about the economic impact that these tariffs could have on the U.S.
So what does he want to do exactly?
So he wants to levy 10% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, China. And that's concerning a lot of Republicans. You're going to see some pushback on Capitol Hill on that. And that differs from a lot of the other issues where you really have a united Republican leadership. It's going to be interesting to see how they push back against Trump when they know he delivered them into office. He gave them that unified Republican control of Congress. So it might be a little testy up on Capitol Hill in the coming months.
You mentioned those tariffs on China. That was repeated during the presidential race up until the election, as much as 60% tariffs at one point. What is he saying about these tariffs now?
Yes. On the campaign trail, he mentioned he could slap as much as 60% tariff on China, but he did not so far. And the latest is he is, as Catherine said, threatening 10% tariff on China. And the reasoning behind this is he's saying because China is sending fentanyl to Canada and Mexico. And that's also the reason why he's threatening tariffs on Mexico and Canada as well, is this fentanyl issue. And so it's interesting to see some analysts are saying that this could be just a bargaining chip for some of the other issues that Trump is going to take up, such as TikTok, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later. And also, on the first day in office, on January 20th, Trump issued a memo to several agencies, and he wants these agencies to review our trade policies. So once he has more information, according to him, he can make better decisions on what to do with tariffs as it relates to other countries.
So let's talk about TikTok. A TikTok ban was supposed to go into effect days ago, unless TikTok's Chinese owner ByteDance sold it to a U.S. company. So that ban has now been delayed 75 days to give more time for a U.S. company to buy it. I'm needing a little more on this because the app was deemed a security risk by President Trump himself in 2020. I don't even have TikTok on my phone because officials at the Pentagon have been saying for years that this is a security risk. You do not want the Chinese to have your public information. So what's changed? Why is he now trying to save this media platform?
So the concern in 2020, it's still the concern now, is a national security risk. And the reason is because the parent company of TikTok, ByteDance, is a Chinese company. It's based in China. And so the concern is that TikTok is able to capture large amounts of user information. And ByteDance, because it's a Chinese company, can assist the government, the Chinese Communist Party, if asked, and whether it's in intelligence work or information collecting. And that's the reason why this ban was put in place. Now, Trump was asked by a reporter why he's kind of changed his tactics on TikTok. And he said, well, he's had a chance to use TikTok, and that's why he changed his mind. He got to use it. And he also attributed a large part of the youth vote during the whole process, to get him elected on TikTok. And so he has a different view on TikTok, but he did say he is working on a way to save TikTok and to protect national security at the same time.
Very interesting. Thank you so much to both of you for your excellent reporting. President Trump campaigned on a promise to urge the United States Congress to pass legislation banning so-called sanctuary cities. These jurisdictions limit cooperation with federal immigration authorities, and some local officials vowed to fight the new administration. VOA immigration correspondent Alini Barros has more.
President-elect Donald Trump made campaign promises to get tough on immigration. He pledged to cut federal funding from so-called sanctuary cities, local governments that limit their cooperation with federal immigration authorities.
As soon as I take office, we will immediately surge federal law enforcement to every city that is failing, which is a lot of them, to turn over criminal aliens, and we will hunt down, capture every single gang member, drug dealer, rapist, murderer, and migrant criminal that is being illegally harbored.
Sanctuary cities include New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Tacoma Park, Maryland, on the border with Washington. Talisha Searcy is mayor.
Our police department still enforce crime. That's important to note. So if there are issues of crime in our community, regardless of someone's immigration status, we enforce.
Searcy says Tacoma Park has been a sanctuary city since 1985.
Our staff are not allowed to enforce immigration laws in the city of Tacoma Park. Our staff are prohibited from inquiring about citizenship or immigration status in order to participate in city programming or receive city benefits.
The mayor says he helps keep communities safe because immigrants are not afraid to report crimes to authorities. Trump issued an executive order during his first administration to end the sanctuary movement. But the order was ruled unconstitutional because the federal government does not control state and local law enforcement. States, including Florida, have passed laws requiring cooperation with federal immigration authorities.
We're not a sanctuary state. We ban sanctuary cities, but you got to have effective accountability to hold those folks accountable if they choose to go in a different direction.
DeSantis says he aims to help Trump with his proposed crackdown. Mayor Searcy says Tacoma Park is prepared for potential conflicts with the incoming administration.
We plan to hold our ideals and hold our policies and hold our code as the law of the land for the city of Tacoma Park.
As President-elect Trump promises tough immigration policies, immigration advocates in sanctuary cities vow to fight the new administration.
Joining me now is VOA immigration correspondent Alini Barros. Let's talk about those sanctuary cities, Alini. What purpose do they serve? Can they realistically mount a fight against the federal government?
Well, one thing that is important to know is that sanctuary is not really part of any law, right? It's just the locality, the city or the town that gets together and say, hey, we're just not going to help ICE picking up people in our city, in our town, in our state. So it's not like ICE officials, immigration officials cannot come in and arrest people if they have to. It's just that that locality, that city is not going to get their police officers and say, here's ICE, police officers will help you. So it's really nothing more than saying, yes, we know we're going to come in if you have to, ICE officials, but we're not going to give you our police officers to help you.
And so the change would mean that specifically?
The change, so with Trump, what he wants is he wants to penalize. He wants to go after these locations and says, okay, well, if you guys are not going to help us, then there's not going to be federal funding. We expect fight at the court level. I spoke with the Tacoma Park City Mayor, and she said that they will stand and they will fight for what they believe and how their community will come together and keep those sanctuary city laws that they have. But we do expect some fighting at the court level.
So, Alini, at least 8 of President Trump's executive orders so far are related to the border.
Right.
He mentioned the border over and over on the campaign trail. What stands out to you in these executive orders?
So we've got this theme ongoing about border security, border security. He wants to build border walls, which is we should talk about the fact that we do have fences and barriers along the border, the U.S.-Mexico border. It's just that he wants to keep on building. So he's pushing for building, more physical barriers, whether it's a big wall or another fence. He wants more of those. He also wants the military at the border. He wants the National Guard at the border. He wants those agencies, those departments to work together with Homeland Security. We don't know exactly what the military will do. We don't know if it's going to be the same thing that they've done in the past.
We're running out of time, but I want to talk about birthright citizenship. That's very important to our audience. Tell us about the changes happening with that.
So the implementation is supposed to happen in 30 days. Right now, there's about 4 cases already filed. So there are 4 different organizations and groups of people who have already sued the Trump administration. One is actually filed today by Casa de Maryland and a few women who are pregnant and about to give birth in March, which is when this order is supposed to take place.
So as of now, if you're not in the country legally, your child does not have American citizenship.
As of March. So if you give birth in March, your child, if you're not lawfully here, if you don't have a permanent status, you may have a visa, you may have a visitor's visa, you may have TPS, you may have a student visa. You have a child in March, that child is not a U.S. citizen. However, we really have to see what's going to happen in the next few weeks, because this order might not even be able to be implemented in March.
Wow, big changes. Alini Barras, thank you so much for keeping us informed about these ongoing changes.
Thank you.
So in a span of roughly 6 hours, movers emptied the White House of the personal belongings of outgoing President Joe Biden and his family. And at the same time, the private residence was remade into a home for the newly sworn-in President Trump. VOA's Dora McClure reports.
The moment Joe Biden leaves the Oval Office for the last time, the White House staff jumps into action, rearranging the iconic office to the tastes of the incoming president. Photos show that Biden changed the rug and some chairs after taking over from Donald Trump, who preceded him and will also succeed him.
Thank you. Donald, congratulations.
But it looks like the couches and curtains remain the same. The president's family lives on the 2nd and 3rd floors of the White House. Before moving day, the incoming president and first lady choose what furniture and art they want from the White House collection. By the time the new president arrives home on Inauguration Day, the furniture is in place and personal family photos are on the walls.
When the new president and first lady move in, they have their favorite shampoo in the shower. They have their toothbrush, toothpaste on the counter. They have their clothes hung up in the closet.
It all happens in under 6 hours, with about 100 White House staffers pitching in. Many of the White House resident staff worked for Donald Trump during his first term, from January 2017 until January 2021.
So the staff really did like Donald Trump because he's used to having people around him serving him. And, he would go around tipping staff in cash, handing out 20s and 50s. And they appreciate that. They are not political. They just care about how the president treats them.
President Barack Obama hired Angela Reed to be the White House's chief usher in 2011. She oversaw moving day in January 2017, when the Obamas moved out and the Trumps moved in.
We have used the term organized chaos, but it really is a very coordinated operation. It's been rehearsed, so many times that on that day, everyone is just chomping at the bits for go time.
But the main challenge is always the time constraint, and having just about 6 hours to get everything ready to welcome the new presidential family home to the White House for the first time. Dora McClure, VOA News, Washington.
Well, that's all for this edition of The Inside Story. I'm Carla Babb in Washington. Stay with voanews.com for the latest on the events impacting your world, and join us next week for more Inside Story. Thanks for watching.